This conference will now be recorded.
Sorry.
Do you want me to start over?
Yeah, let's just start again, and that way I can record it for the people who couldn't make it today.
Okay. So my name is Melissa, and I started writing when I was 9. And the story that eventually got published, I started when I was like 19 or 20. And then I started the process of trying to publish it when I was 22. And I sent to like 30 something publishers, like everybody I could find. And I did not have an agent because
Hold on 1 second. Miss Barbara, mute your mic while you're not talking.
I don't know how to do that.
Ask Lorena to help you. She's right there.
Lorena, how do I mute the mic?
Should be in the lower corner. You should be able to just mute it.
You can't see nothing here.
I think you click on the little microphone itself.
Right there.
Oh,
Yeah, it's green and just click it one time.
Green, you click it, it should turn red.
Yeah, that one. What's that?
Okay, good. Thank you. Now, let's continue, Melissa.
Okay, so I started mass querying. You have to write a query letter, and every publisher kind of wants something different. It's kind of like a cover letter. So for every publisher I sent it to, I had to write a different query letter. And then of the like 30 something, Black Rose Writing was one that said yes. And I started querying in August, and they said yeah. I had a contract by like New Year's, which is really unrealistic. It doesn't normally happen that way, but that's how it happened for me. And I did not have an agent because I thought I was just kind of trying it to see what happened. I didn't really expect anything to happen. And I thought because I was so young, I didn't think it would happen that early in my life. And I just thought, let's just try it and see what happens.
Okay, good. Okay, Tina, and I think actually I messed up. I think you were there first and then Melissa, but we'll get everybody.
Totally fine. So the question is, when did I start writing? I don't remember when I wasn't writing, so it must have been really young. I remember pounding at the keyboard, writing short stories after I read my first Irma Brombeck book, which I stole from my mother, and then King and Kuntz and all the other things that I was stealing from library shelves that I wasn't allowed to be checking out. But I had one librarian who would just give me books on the sly and didn't look at my age because I was pretty young. I've written textbooks and for years, since probably 2012, and literally just corralled an editor I found in a hallway at my university and pitched a book, and she said, okay. That's totally shocked, but secretly I was writing novels and afraid to do anything with them. So I finished one with the help of a peer group. We were called the Shid Writers with 2 Ds. And the goal was to write a book. And if it was really horrible, put another name on it, but you just had to finish it. So I self-published that one in 2016 to go through the whole process. And then, like Melissa, I sent it to about 30 publishers. And then Black Rose Writing sent me an email out of the blue, like, hey, is this still available? I'm like, oh my heavens. Yeah, it's still available. And since then, I published another book with them just last month in the same series. It's been great.
Good. Stephen.
Hi there. So I got into writing because I'm in pharmaceuticals, and my book was on bioterrorism, The Iceman Kills. And it's not really about COVID. It's really about how to stop bioterrorism, which ends up in a worldwide pandemic. I wrote it 4 years ago. I didn't write it last week when all this was going on. But yeah, I got into it because I was a flight instructor in pharmaceutical engineering, and it was like a real natural fit. So it wasn't like I was in a shady part of town. I walked up to a guy and he says, well, I'll give you $100 if you write a book for me. You know, it was kind of a natural fit. And I wrote 3 publishers. I did the homework, and I found a publisher. I found publishers that were interested in first-time authors. And I thought, this is really good. This is what I need to do. 2 out of the 3 responded. They gave me feedback. And this publisher, Black Rose, gave me a lot of really good feedback. They gave me like 2 full pages single spaced. We think you ought to do this and that. And I thought these guys are really interested. So I thought this is good. I'll go with them. And it was a good decision.
Great. And forgive me, but I know one of our other writers is Rebecca, so I'm not sure which of you is my writer and which is a patron that's joining the program. But whichever Rebecca it is, if you would please respond. Flynn, okay.
I'm the writer. I've been writing since 9 or 10 years old. Always wanted to be a writer. I went to school for journalism. I actually had a professor tell me at one point that I would not make it as a writer because I had zero talent. So that was really fantastic for me. At that point, I kind of changed majors and I went into computers, but I kept writing. And when I met my husband, he's been this massive help as far as researching and stuff like that. He's gone and done all the research with me for my books. I've got one that's already published through Black Rose. Originally, I published through iUniverse, and that was a self-published kind of a thing, print on demand, and didn't really get very far with them. So I kind of went and looked other places, and a coworker of mine was dating somebody who went through Black Rose, and I was like, okay, well, let me check them out and see what they're all about. Over the years, I have queried agents, I have queried publishers. Every response that I ever got was no. Nobody ever wanted to take a chance on me. And then I got an email from Black Rose, and I was like, do you want to take a chance? So it was a huge deal for me. I did a signing out in Knoxville, and it was great. I mean, this has probably been the best experience that I've ever had, because they're so excited with me. It's not just me being excited about my work. They're excited with me. They're like, yeah, we want to do this. We're going to do this, and they're publishing the second book in the trilogy. Comes out in January of next year. So really excited. This has been just the best experience for me.
Great. So it sounds like almost everyone has been writing pretty much all their lives and actually got into the publishing and did the query letters. So in order to send out those query letters, and if we could just kind of go in the same order, how do you find those publishers? Do you need to look specifically, like if it's science fiction, do you need to look specifically for publishers that are interested in that? Or if it's Western or history, how do I know which publishers to contact?
I started looking for, the first thing I would do was find ones that accepted what they call unsolicited manuscripts. Unsolicited means you don't have an agent attached. And so from there, I would see if they would even consider looking at mine. And mine is like kind of a middle school age range. So if they would accept, a lot of publishers, they would say, well, we only publish for adults. So just breaking down, first of all, who accepts it unsolicited, and then who accepts my age group. And the biggest publisher I submitted to was Arthur A. Levine, which they've been around like a really long time. They were the biggest, but then a lot of them were like smaller independent presses, And each one wanted something different in the query letter, different information. Some of them wanted a 3-page summary, some of them wanted a 1-paragraph summary. And that's like the hardest part of the whole process, is all the query letters, because everybody wants one different.
All right, Tina?
And I'll add to that. So when I was a teenager, other girls were looking at, teen magazines, and I was poring over the writer's market. And so maybe about 8 years ago or so, I got a new writer's market. It was like revisiting my teenage years and going through, and it's a big, huge volume, and it's outdated the second it gets published. However, it comes now with a digital code where you have access to their database. And so that's where I started for this query for the indie publisher. But I believe, I don't even think I got Black Rose writing from there. I just kept following all the rabbit holes searching for the right match for genre, the right match for in my case, since I had self-published the same book, was now considered a reprint. So not everyone was really interested in that and acquiring the rights. And finding unsolicited again, because I don't have an agent. I haven't started even looked for one. Maybe next time. I don't know.
Stephen?
So Alyssa, let me give the viewers some really good advice. I think we have like 3 categories of viewers. You're either high school, adult, or before high school. So the way I did it is I used this guy right here. This is kind of like the Bible for upcoming writers. And I see some people looking at it, smiling, thinking, yeah, I've seen that before, I've used it. It's a really good thing to do. And what happens is you look in this and you find out your genre, the publisher that does what you like to do, or you find one that specializes in it. And then you find out lots of statistics on it. You find out, well, these guys right here will publish this percent, or they'll look at this percent in a year. Maybe they publish 12 books a year, or maybe they publish 100. And you can do the research. I spent hours doing this. And I think I mentioned I went to 3 publishers. I found the ones that were interested in my genre. I found the ones that were going with the new authors. They specialize in that, which is like, you know, what Black Rose does and the others. And then you get a really good chance. Your odds go way up because that's what they want. That's what they're looking for. And yeah, you write those guys, and I picked out 3, and they were the top choices, and 2 out of 3 were really interested. And one of them, the third one, closed up shop before they got back to me. So, you know, I mean, the proof is in the pudding.
All right, Rebecca?
I kind of had a lot of the same experience as everybody else. For me, I did a lot of my stuff online. I would search through, I would just type in publisher, and then from there I would narrow it down. I do fantasy, and you have to be really careful with that because there's fantasy and then there's the fantasy genre. So you kind of have to be really careful with that stuff, because I have a lot of people that ask about that as well. But I had to go through and find, you know, does this publishing company do fantasy? Okay. Do they accept unsolicited? Okay. Are they accepting anything right now? Because there's a lot of publishing companies that say, yeah, we accept this, but we're currently not accepting anything. So I would go through hours and hours looking at these sites and looking at submission requirements, and is it worth it for me to print out a full copy of my book to mail it to them? Do they accept electronic? That's another big problem that I had. Now a lot of them will accept electronic, but there's still some that will not, and that gets a little pricey for people. You know, when you've got a 300-page novel and you're sending that out to multiple publishers, that's a lot of paper, a lot of ink, a lot of stamps, you know, and it gets a little, you know, the question comes, is it worth it for you? So I tended to gravitate more towards this is electronic, I can do it this way, and it's a lot less monetarily speaking.
Yeah, that's exactly how I did mine. I just like internet searched and I narrowed it down to electronic submission.
Okay, those are all great tips. And yes, we used to have the writer's market, but because it gets outdated so quickly, we've not been having it in the library. And so if I can let people know that they can go on and do an online purchase of that, then they can have the electronic database to search. Is that what you said, Tina?
Yes, it comes with a 1-year subscription to their database.
Ah, okay. So I can let people who are interested in writing know that. That would be wonderful. Okay, I think all of you have touched briefly on your genres. Do you plan to stay in the genre you're in, or do you have a lot of our writers, because I do a group called Read and Discuss Texas, our RAD group, And so we look at genres a lot to see, you know, is this a genre that everybody's going to be interested in or not? But a lot of genres are getting kind of blended these days. So do you plan to stay in your genre or maybe write in different genres? Okay, everybody knows Patterson, adult mystery, suspense, but he's added junior age books. He's added a series in the young adult. So it's somewhere I think writers might need to look for the future. So how do you feel about all that, Melissa? There were a question in there somewhere.
So mine are also fantasy, and my second one's coming out in August, also with Black Rose. And I find it hard to go back to real life when you come from fantasy, especially when it's like a fun type of world and you can like, because you have a lot less limits. But also there's like so much time ahead of me. I don't like to say, oh, that's all I'm ever going to do, because I don't know what I'll be doing in like 10 or 20 years. I might have changed gears. So I really don't know. Like, I'm open to doing anything.
Okay. How do you feel about the genre blending that a lot of them are doing? I'm thinking of like the Jane Austen and zombie things that are coming out now.
Pride and Prejudice and zombies.
Yes, thank you.
I mean, I think people can do whatever they want to do. That doesn't mean I want to read it.
Okay. All right, Tina.
Textbooks aside, I think my goal in life is probably to have every type of readership out there. I have all of them. So even on the textbook side, I have the 3D animation, the 2D animation, which are two different camps. My first book I considered it sci-fi fantasy, which is a whole debate. But my publisher, Black Rose, really pegged it as a paranormal romance. I don't think it's that romantic. In fact, it's the least romantic book ever. It's pretty scary, but there is a love story in it. And then the next book, so all of the books that I'm writing are in a universe. Like, it's called the Darkness universe. The first one, Absolute Darkness, is sci-fi fantasy, definitely makes you sweat. The one that just published in May is YA fantasy, and it's a love story. It's very precious. It's an origin story, different genre, same universe. And then the one I'm writing now is straight up thriller. And to Melissa's point as well, it's really hard not to go to the fantasy elements, which is, so there's like 3 layers in all my books. So the fantasy layer is there, but I won't touch it in this thriller, though I know it's there. And anyone watching the universe will see the characters pop on for just like a cup of coffee, and they'll go away and you'll be like, wait a second, doesn't that dude like time travel? And it's none of that is in this thriller. Thriller, straight up thriller. It's just a couple of psychopaths and the lady trying to get away from them. And it's hard not to throw those fantasy bits, but they're all connected. And in that, I think what I'm trying to do is kind of find the genre I like. But just like in my teaching life, I'm a professor, I like all the aspects. So I think I'm just going to continue to circle around.
Okay, that's interesting. Stephen?
So my advice would be to, especially pre-high school and high school and adult, is write about what you know. It's the #1 rule in writing. And it's like, you know, you're going to hear it again and again and again. But, you know, if you're listening and you're pre-high school, it's like, and that's the first time you've heard it, you might think, well, what do I know? I don't know anything. You know, I'm young, I haven't been out there. But if you sit down in a quiet room for a few minutes, write those things down about what you really know. Maybe you know about video games, or maybe you know a little bit about dating, or I don't know, about doggies and cats, or whatever it is. But you got to write about what you know. So to answer your question, I started off writing a book that did pretty well, and it was called Ruby in the Rough, and it was about a little boy growing up. So it's a coming of age story. And, you know, got a lot of really positive feedback on it. Then I switched to something totally different, sort of like Ian Fleming. I wrote The Iceman Kills, and it's, you know, because it was in pharmaceuticals. But lo and behold, you know, COVID-19 rolls around and it's, you know, doing really well. People want to read that stuff. It's not about COVID-19. It's about what leads up to it, how to stop a worldwide pandemic. And it was a flu pandemic too, really nasty one, worse than the Spanish flu. And it's about, starts off with history. So it's history based, and it talks about what actually happened about 100 years ago and about 40 years ago when they discovered up in way up north, up in, you know, frozen ground, the Spanish flu. So my point in bringing that up is this is something I knew about, something I really enjoyed doing. And a lot of the books about flying too. And I taught flying for 30 years and still do it, still flight instructor. There's a lot of flying in the book and a few scenes that are really hair raising, like you're like, wow, you know, you're starting to sweat when you read it. But I sat in the airplane for a lot of years watching students do the same thing and hoping when I got out of that plane and soloed them for the first time that they wouldn't crash that plane. I knew it in my heart, you know, that they weren't going to do it because I trained them right. So you got to write about what, you know, is important. And that's what I did in my 2 genres. And yeah, I think I'm going to stick with one of those. You know, it's like Ian Fleming. He wrote a book called that had to do with James Bond. And I think a lot of people know who James Bond is now, but he also wrote another book about children that was made into a movie called Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And a lot of people don't realize that. It's like, wow, how can you do that? How can you write 2 stories that are like so radically different? James Bond and these little kids that are going out and, you know, but it's whatever's in your heart, and that's what you're going to enjoy doing. And when the day is done, and you wrap that story up, you're going to close it and say, wow, I'm really proud of that book. And hopefully you'll do a good job, but that's your best chance of success.
Okay, Rebecca?
For me, I've actually got, there are nights when I cannot sleep because I've got so many ideas going on in my head. Like I said, my husband has been a huge help to me as far as researching and things like that. And he's actually provided me with a lot of ideas for stories. And he'll just make a random comment and I'll be like, that sounds like a really good story. And I'll write it down. And it may not have anything to do with what I'm working on at that moment, but just that idea kind of sparks something. And whether or not it actually gets published later on, that's another story. But if it's something that, you know, you just get this little click in your head and you're like, I can go with that. And, you know, if you can get it down on paper, great. You know, I have no problem with the jumping back and forth and things like that. We actually are working on writing some children's books together as well. So, you know, picture books and stuff. So, you know, he'll draw the pictures, I'll write the story. So, you know, you can go all over the place as long as what you're doing is something that somebody will want to read, then I see no problem with it. I have no problem going back and forth.
Okay. So I know that several of you said you didn't have agents when you started. Do you have agents now? And how important do you think it would be to have an agent? I mean, most of you are published, I mean, you're all published through Black Rose. Do you need an agent, or is it easy to deal directly with your publisher? What about the legal parts of it? Just get a lawyer to help you with that?
I have found them really easy to work with, and I didn't have a lawyer. I had my family look over the contract, and because I put no money into it, I felt that it was not a risk. You know, if it was one of those publishers that like wants you to pay, which I wouldn't work with that anyway. But that's more of a risk if they want you to pay. But I was putting no money into it, and then there's the copyright issue, but I just kind of trusted them, and there hasn't been any issue. The benefit of an agent is you can get to bigger places, and I would like to have an agent in the future, but you can very much successfully be an author your whole life without an agent.
And I have to step out in just a couple minutes to go give a stop motion workshop to another group. Yeah, I don't have an agent. I do have lawyer friends who looked over the contracts both with Focal Press and then with Black Rose. And I had the Focal Press, which is like this big, you know, and Taylor and Francis company that I could compare the contracts to, and they were very similar. Of course, Indie Press has different things. The royalties were about the same. How many free copies you get and how much they can put in with marketing is a difference between the two. But I actually felt like both publishers worked on my benefit, for my benefit, and did really great. And I don't feel like I've lost anything out without having an agent. If anything, I've heard worse horror stories about agents. Not to say that all agents are bad, but just some of the stories I've heard about being taken advantage of came from the agent side of things with misrepresentation. But I've also heard great things with agents who just knew the market. What you get with them is they know the market, they know the publishers, they know exactly what they're looking for, and can help point you towards, like, hey, if you go over here, they're really looking for this, they're looking to expand into this new market, and they can help you with that. And I think in the future, maybe I'd look for it. I'm kind of curious just because I've gone through the indie, the big, etc., self-published. That's the last one I haven't touched for, the full educational understanding. And thanks for having me. I am going to have to check out.
All right, bye.
Nice meeting you all.
Okay, so Stephen?
Hi, nice meeting you.
Alyssa, I would say that authors who finish their book and they're trying to find a publisher need to use a real practical approach. You have to realize that the book you wrote is probably not as wonderful as you think it is, except for the Iceman Kills. No, the truth is, what I'm trying to say is when you write a book, realize that if you find a publisher, then you are doing really well. You're like way up there because there's so many books that get rejected. So realize that when you go into it, tell yourself, I just want to find a publisher. Don't worry about an agent. My experience is, and I know several authors, and maybe everybody would say the same thing, I don't know here today, but it's going to be a long time before you find an agent. Get a book out there, publish it. If you find a good publisher, great. Then at some point down the road, figure that out, go to an agent. But there's a big learning curve when you write your first book and you publish it and you start working to get it out there. I was really lucky because The Iceman Kills is about terrorism and about a global pandemic. So people were really interested. I got a television interview right away. But don't always count on that. But there's a big learning curve after that, and a lot of things you have to do. And Black Roses, puts out a lot of information on it, and they have webinars and things like that to train you. But you're doing a lot of that yourself. You're going out to people and you're reaching out to libraries and going and doing book signings. And these days you're doing a lot of things online, like what we're doing today. It helps publicize, the book that you've written, and maybe, being lucky enough to get a radio or a television interview or get your name in the newspapers. Those are things you have to plan out. And also, doing giveaways and things like that. There's a lot involved there way before you get to an agent. And as far as a lawyer, like we've said before, a lot of us don't have a whole lot of money to invest in this. So it's probably not likely that you're going to go get a lawyer. But yeah, I asked a few other authors that I knew, weren't big publishing authors, but just good friends, people who I'd met. And I said, what do you think of this contract? And I said, what do you think of this specific point and this specific point? And they gave me advice on it. And I changed one or two things, but not a lot. Again, when you get out there the first time, you're lucky to get a publisher. And hopefully you get a publisher and you do your homework, maybe look in the writer's market or whatever, and you find somebody who's been out there a little while and seems reputable. And you're probably going to get a good contract. There's probably not going to be anything in it that you need a lawyer for. But, just realize that most lawyers are charging $200 or $300 an hour. So yeah, there you go.
Okay, Rebecca?
I did not have a lawyer look at anything with either one, with Universal or with Black Rose. I actually looked through everything myself. I took hours just going over everything, saying, okay, does this make sense? Does this make sense? I actually had my dad take a look at it for me because my dad used to deal in a lot of contracts where he worked before. So he kind of took a look at it and said, okay, this makes sense. This is okay. This is all right, before I signed anything. Black Rose has actually been really easy to work with without an agent. I have not had one. I was trying to work with somebody before. We never had a contract down, so I wasn't technically working with her. But I mean, I just pretty much did everything myself. I was the one that was contacting everybody. I was the one that was reading over the contracts. And, you know, I knew personally that if I looked at it myself and I didn't trust somebody else to look at it, that I would know exactly what was in there. So it made it easier for me to make sure that I covered myself, you know. And quite frankly, like I said, the Black Rose contract was very straightforward. They spelled everything out for me. I didn't have any confusion. I mean, after reading through it, I think I had maybe one question for them, and that was it. You know, but they made it really easy for me to work with. So as far as having an agent goes, I don't feel like it's really 100% necessary, because it's basically another person that you have to go through in order to get things done. Whereas right now, it's me working directly with the publisher. And it's like, I ask them a question, they talk directly to me. We don't have to get a third party involved. There's nobody else that has to have a say in anything. So for me, I think it's a lot easier. And they're doing everything that I need them to do. You know, they're keeping up their end of the contract. I'm keeping up my end of the contract. As long as, you know, both parties are keeping up their end, I don't really see a problem.
Okay, well, it's 5 after 2, so we only have another 20-25 minutes for our program. I would like to help our teens and our adults who are maybe interested in becoming writers maybe get started with the story. So if you guys could maybe help give us some, you know, a little scenario or a writing prompt that they can take and write something, then they can bring it into the library. And those who would like, I can share it with email with Mr. Rohde at Black Rose, or if our writers would like to be in on it, I could share with you and you can maybe give our teens some guidance. So Melissa, do you have an idea for a teen or even our adults? Because we decided to let our adults join this program too. Just a little, you know, couple of sentences for them to get started with.
Okay, I got us a tall tale writing prompt, and it's blank. Well, you have to name the person. Blank was so big he could, and then you tell us what he can do.
Okay, so we could talk about something similar to Paul Bunyan. Okay.
Or any adjective, like not just big, but like what if they were so small or so fast or anything like that.
Good idea. That's a good start. So Stephen, do you have a writing prompt for us?
I do. I wasn't quite sure where you were going with this before we got into it, and I'm glad Melissa went first because it gave me to think about what I was going to say. Okay, let's see. So let me set something up for you. We're writing a spy story, and this big guy from the FBI is going to somebody's house to interview this little girl. She's the daughter, and she's 9 years old, and she doesn't like big guys, and she doesn't like anybody with a deep voice, and she doesn't like spies, and she doesn't know anything about the FBI. But she's seen something, and this FBI guy needs to find out. And he's like, how on earth am I going to make this little girl like me? You know, I'm about 3 times as tall as she is, and I'm probably about 5 times the weight she is, and my hands are huge compared to this little girl. And how can I go to her, you know, tonight? I'm supposed to go over there and interview her and find out what she knows. How am I going to do that? So I'll give you my answer, and I'll let you know the viewers and the listeners come up with their own. I thought, well, what if he talked to the mother and found out something about Lissa, and found out how old she was and what she liked, and he went over to the house and said, hi, Lissa. I was really nervous about coming today, but your mom says you like chocolates, and I love chocolates too. And here's a chocolate for you. And he picks one out of the air with nothing in his hand because he's a magician and she doesn't know that. And he gives her a Hershey's Kiss, and she says, I love Hershey's Kisses. How did you know that? Well, I talked to your mom, and I have a little present here. I've got a few questions, but I got this little present here for you. And she opens the box, and her mom says that she loves cats, and she's got a cat. And it's a little cat, and it looks just like her cat. And she gets to take it to bed and carry it to school in the morning. And she's like, I like this guy. What do you want to know? So write a story about how, Lissa is going to talk to this FBI agent, in particular, how this big guy is going to, communicate and get this little girl to talk.
Okay, that's very interesting. I have to think about that. Rebecca.
One thing that I used to do in college when I did my writing classes, my favorite part was when they did this kind of stuff. And I actually did some short stories in school. And my favorite one was when they had us take an inanimate object and write a story from that object's perspective. So kind of like a Disney scenario where like with, the emotions and stuff like that with Inside Out and things like that. So if you can write a story from the perspective of an inanimate object, a banana, a chair, a tree, something like that, I think it could get interesting.
I did one about a pencil sharpener in school.
I did mine about a banana. It was weird, but it was fun. It was a lot of fun to do.
Well, those all sound very interesting, and I would have to really think hard to try to come up with something. And the last time Mr. Rohde was here, he did a teen program, and he was helping them do haikus. And I thought of that today because we drew cards out of an envelope, and you had to put everything in the card that you drew out. I think we drew 3 cards, and you had to put it in the haiku. And so I think, if I remember right, Miss Barbara might remember this. I had an umbrella and a beach ball and something else. So it was very interesting to try to put it all into one little thing like that. So anything that I think makes your imagination work, that makes you have to go, now how would that work? I think that's a good place to start when you're trying to write. And I want to go back to something that I think it was Stephen said, write what you know. My Rad Texas group, we did a series of Texas mysteries. And so Rick Riordan, who is a San Antonio author, at least most of his life he was in San Antonio, he actually wrote a series of adult books. Most people know him for his junior fiction, the Percy Jackson and those, but he wrote a series of adult books. And he said the reason he wrote those is he had moved from Texas to California where he was teaching, and he was missing his home. And so he was thinking about what he knew about San Antonio, and that's where he got his inspiration for his books. So just to kind of reiterate, write what you know, use your imagination. Let's go back through if you guys have any other tips before we conclude today. Any other tips, Melissa?
I would just say, like, going back to write what you know, because I misunderstood that most of my life, and I thought it was like only write about things you've experienced. But it can also be like you can draw on your experience. Like if you're writing about fantasy, you don't know that because it's all made up. You've never been there. But the heart of it is still true because it is based on your experiences and like what you felt and what you thought. And so you can take what you know and put it in any situation. That would be my tip. Like just keep the core of it, like the truth of it is in the core because it's what you think and feel. And that's what is writing. That's the part that you know, and then you can put it in any situation, even if you haven't experienced it.
That sounds very logical. Stephen, any other tips?
I've got a really good tip for folks. Doesn't matter what age you are. You really want to get a team together when you write. Start writing, have a good time. But when you get halfway through the book, or especially when you're nearing the finish, preferably the first half of the book, start finding people who want to read your book. Go to select people, especially the younger you are. Figure out who it is that can keep their mouth shut and not tell everybody or anybody what your book's about. But you have to build a team. And for me, it was 8 or 10 people. And so, 1 or 2 of them were authors, and some of them were like subject matter experts, and some of them were just people that really liked to read my genre. I went to high school with a guy, and we keep in touch. But I told him about it. He's like, "Oh, you wrote a spy book? I love those things. I read about so and so and so and so, and I never heard of these people." And I thought, yeah, because if you get somebody enthusiastic about it, they're going to want to read your book. And they will give you really good advice, and listen to them. Listen to them when they say, "This doesn't make sense. This part right here doesn't fit up with this part. Don't you see?" And they'll tell you those things that you can't see. And, build your team. Later on, as you get older, you're going to have an editor. My editor was a guy that I taught with. In other words, he was a volunteer English instructor, and I speak Spanish fluently. And so I go and teach Hispanic students, a lot of them in this country, and I teach them how to speak English. I've been doing that for 15 years. That's what he did. I admired this guy so much, and we became really good friends. Found out he was an editor, so he became my editor. And I had an assistant editor. I called him a specialized editor, and he's in the book in the front, for credits. And he was part of the team too. So, get some other people involved, people that you trust, and listen to what they say, because they'll give you some really good advice.
That sounds like real helpful advice. I know lots of writers that I read in their acknowledgement sections, they mention a writing group that they're part of where they critique each other's work. I understand the trick with that is to find a group that is not overly critical, not negatively critical, but that honestly are there to assist each other. Rebecca?
Don't feel like you need to write what everybody else is writing, because one thing that I learned when I started working on my books was that there are a lot of people out there who have their own take on vampires, werewolves, things like that. But when you've got a market that's so overly saturated with these kinds of things, people are going to get bored with them pretty quick. So for me, going into fantasy, I wanted to do stuff that people would want to read, but I wanted to pick things that people hadn't seen before, or things that weren't really out there that much. So don't feel like you need to follow in somebody else's footsteps. You don't need to be the next Rowling. You don't need to be the next Stephen King. You don't have to be that person. And if you enjoy what you're doing, there's always going to be somebody out there that's going to enjoy it as well. That's one thing that I'm very critical of myself. And I'm sure there's, everybody else here is probably the same way. I feel like, yeah, I like what I'm doing, but are other people really going to like it? There's always going to be somebody that's going to want to read it. And I was surprised to get the kind of response that I got. So far, I've gotten nothing but positive responses. So don't be scared of it. Don't be scared of what you're doing, because if you like it, somebody else is going to like it too. And if you ever get to a point, and this is something that I personally use, if you ever get to a point where you're writing and you stop because you feel like you're stuck, role play. Get together with somebody and role play your characters, because I'm a woman and I don't necessarily know how a man is going to respond to certain things. So if I'm writing a conversation, I will tell my husband, okay, this is the situation. You're going to be this person. I'm going to be this person. This is what I'm going to say. You respond to me. How would you respond? You know, and that has helped me get through so many bad spots. I actually do a role-playing game with my husband and some friends, and I will put the characters into the game and kind of have it play out in the game. And it has helped me to get through those spots. And I hadn't thought about it. And then I was like, one day I went, why don't we just play this, you know, and see where it goes? And it was the greatest thing. It just, everything just opened up and I was like, well, that makes perfect sense. So, you know, definitely get other people to help you with these things, you know, bounce ideas off of somebody else, talk to somebody else, you know, act it out, do something, get it to where you can see what's going on, and it'll help you break those blocks.
Okay. I do want to thank you all for joining us and participating. All of you writers should have my email at the library. I would love, I haven't had a chance to go look at Black Rose's site and find your books, but if you'll send me an email, I'll look at them for our library, and then we'll go from there. Again, I do appreciate the time you took today. I realize it was time out of your day. Oh, yes, yes, I see, and I see yours there. Okay, Melissa, you're supposed to be holding yours up.
Mine's over here. Let me get it.
Okay. So I have been a reader all my life.
I don't even normally have a copy, but I took it from my parents.
Ah, cool.
Hey, Maddie, shh. There we go.
Well, great. So I do need to look at all your books and see what I can do about getting them for our library. It might be October because I'm at the end of budget cycle, but we'll see. At least I know they're out there and I can look for them. Like I was saying, I've been a reader all my life. I love lots of different genres. I read very eclectically. Right now I'm trying to finish up the Great American Reads list from 2018. I still have about 6 or 8 books on there to finish. But I'm more than happy to read all your things, and hopefully you will come and join us sometime when we all can be in person. You're in Cincinnati, Stephen. That's a little far away. You may not ever get to Texas,
but I like Texas.
Everything's better in
Tennessee.
Texas.
Oh, great. So you're all in Texas. So
Nope,
No, I'm in
Tennessee.
Alabama. I just like Texas.
So our library is in Hondo, which is about 35, 40 miles west from San Antonio. And it's only about 17 miles from Castroville, where Black Roses actually has their offices. So if you ever get in the area, come by and see us. We have a really neat library. We got a grant from the John L. Santikos Foundation out of San Antonio that furnished this new building. The building opened 3 years ago, and we have a dinosaur and giraffes and an aquarium and just all kinds of really neat learning potential for our kids. My goal as the library director who came here just right after they opened is to add programming like this so that our students and our adults can have some chances to experience other means of education and entertainment. So again, one more time, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Thank you.
Thank you for having
Bye.
me.
All right.
Yes, thank you for
Okay.
having me.
Yeah, I'm going to end the recording and shut us down.
Sounds good.